open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And welcome, everybody, to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. I know you're all very excited, but settle down because we have a big show, and I want to make sure you catch every bit of it because, of course, we have the big kind of political news of the last few days has been that Beshear's Lieutenant Governor, Jacqueline Coleman, has announced that she is going to be running for governor, setting up an interesting primary on the Democrat side that will occur between Jacqueline Coleman and Rocky Atkins. Obviously, Rocky hasn't declared yet, but it is absolutely fascinating. They both have ties, obviously. Beshear, Jacqueline Coleman, Lieutenant Governor. Rocky Atkins is Beshear's advisor. See, he's chief of staff or he's a high up advisor, though. He's like goes with Beshear everywhere. And he was also a big part of his dad's administration. So those are big things going on, but also I will be talking as well about some Eastern Kentucky nonprofits. I started, this last spending bill, I dug through it and I see all this money being set aside for various nonprofits. And I started digging into it and I see there's a lot of nonprofits getting millions of dollars in state taxpayer funds aimed in Eastern Kentucky, all around this Eastern Kentucky idea that we need to revitalize the area, and we absolutely do. And so when I talk about these nonprofits and when I talk about the issues going on with them, I don't want you to think that I'm just saying, look, Eastern Kentucky, forget about it. It doesn't deserve anything at all. If anything, it does deserve something because the federal government especially has taken a lot of steps to make sure to destroy that area. We'll discuss that. But also about how these nonprofits that are supposed to bring in jobs and create a great economy for the area and how they're receiving millions of tax dollars. And at the end of the day, what are they actually delivering, including one nonprofit that Beshear is actually the chair of. That's right. Our Governor Beshear is the chair of a nonprofit that receives millions in taxpayer funds. In fact, the taxpayer is their main provider, state tax dollars. So obviously a very questionable things going on. So we'll dig in to all of that as well. So we've got the lieutenant governor declaring, we got Rocky Atkins, lieutenant governor fight. We'll talk about that and talk about these nonprofits. Now, if you like what you're hearing, you can tune into the Andrew Cooperrider Show. That's my other once weekly show. It's right here on WGTK, Sundays at 6, on WBNA, Wednesdays at, I believe, 11. But you can also head over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com to see, to not miss an episode of that. Actually, after I leave here, I'll be going to interview and discuss with Dr. Stephen Voss, the head of political science at University of Kentucky, to discuss what's going on with the Senate races and congressional races and just kind of dig in to Republican politics in general. I'm certainly looking forward to that discussion. Chances are it'll be much longer than 45 minutes, which is how long I have on radio and TV. So if you want to catch all of it, you got to head over to theandrewshow.com when I put that up there. Should be put up tomorrow. But I do want to remind everybody that they can go ahead and shoot us a text message. If they want to join into the conversation, I will field your text messages. That number is 502-571-0970. Once again, that's 502-571-0970. 70502-571-0970. That's the Kentucky Voice text line. As you send those texts in, I'll be responding. I'll be talking about them. We'll be dealing with them, answering your questions. Hopefully you all are going to learn some stuff today. I know there's some news here, especially on the Eastern Kentucky nonprofits nobody else is talking about. They're afraid to talk about it. It's like a third rail. But here on Kentucky's Voice with your host, Andrew Cooprider, we will be touching that third rail and causing some controversy. And I know there will be controversy because when I posted about this online, oh boy, did I get some controversy. So we'll be discussing that when we get back here on Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooprider. We'll see you in a short minute.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
All right, you're back on Kentucky's Voice. Your host today, Andrew Cooprider. Once again, if you want to join into the conversation, the number is 502-571-0970. So I want to mention here some nonprofits out in Eastern. So I was digging through some financial documents in the state, and I keep seeing these nonprofits getting millions of dollars, all to, revitalize, fix, solve the woes of Eastern Kentucky. And this is a larger discussion, of course. There's a lot of issues going on there, but I want to focus in on a couple of these nonprofits and just kind of discuss how what they're doing, I believe, is kind of a waste. So first, we have over $4 million in Kentucky taxpayer funds. That's just Kentucky. Now, there's been more money from other states going to this nonprofit called Backwoods of Appalachia. Their biggest chunk was $3.8 million in order to build a 200-acre off-road training and rally driving facility. Now, I wanted to find out some more about this nonprofit. So I sent an email to the nonprofit there last week and gave them quite some time to respond. I gave them like 4 or 5 days to respond and asking some very pointed questions. Why is this a good investment? What's our return on investment? What do you expect to happen? Because especially this rally driving training group, I mean, it's got all of 16 RV spots, right? So obviously they don't, for those of you who aren't familiar with the off-road community, 200 acres is not a lot of space, right? Most of these off-road parks that people are traveling to are going to be at least have over 100 miles of trails available to ride on for them to be like worth going a day. So 200 acres isn't going to provide 100 miles worth of trails. This is literally like, as they said, a training facility. It'll have probably a track, some basic areas kind of roped off for rally drivers to practice and as such. And look, I go to the rally races that happen in Kentucky. I also ride dirt bikes, quads, off-road, just about every weekend. That's what I'm doing with my weekend. For those of you who are unaware, my son and I, we hop on the old bikes. I ride a 2011 KX450F. For those of you that don't know, that's a super awesome bike. One of the first years they did fuel injection, one of the best bikes ever made, in my opinion, made by Kawasaki. But anyways, putting that to the side. Bigger guy too. I need that 450. But putting that to the side. So I'm not coming at this as somebody who sees no value. I'm not coming at this as somebody who says, look, this is a waste. These people don't provide anything. What I'm coming at this from is the first position of what does this nonprofit actually do? So I asked them specifically, do you put on events? Do you just coordinate events? What do you do outside of your $4 million taxpayer funded rally driving track? What do you do? And they eventually ended up responding, confirming that they themselves do not really put on events. What they do is they help other people putting on events deal with basically a lobbying firm, deal with the governments, deal with the licensing, deal with insurance, kind of get that all taken care of. And a recent event, to give you an example, is at the off-road park MindMade. Was a recent event that MindMade put on involving, dirt bikes and quads and racing or whatever. And enduro racing is an example. And does that bring in people? Absolutely, it does. Don't get me wrong. But my point here is that MindMade is a for-profit off-road park. They have every incentive themselves to put on these types of events. It makes them money. They don't need a nonprofit receiving $1.3 million a year in taxpayer funding, according to their 990s, that has a director being paid over $100,000 a year in order for them to have an incentive to put on these events. Then also, you have the fact that when we look at the 990s for this nonprofit, Backroads of Appalachia, what we see is that most of their money, they're paying $106,000 to their director. They're also paying $70,000 in travel expenses. They're also then paying around $500,000 of their money to a consulting company. Now that raised some questions because I know how a lot of these nonprofits operate. They will spend their money giving it to a consulting company or some other organization that's owned by the same people that are running the nonprofit. They're shuffling money off. So I directly asked them what company it was, what do they do? And when they did eventually respond after I made my post, what they claimed was the first things the consulting company did was legal and accounting work for them. The problem with that claim is when you look at the 990, those are separate line items. Those aren't a part of your consulting costs. Therefore, that isn't explaining where that over $500,000 is going to. And then they explain, it's for like GPS tracking and blah, 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 in order to put together routes. So that's the other thing they do is they publish these routes that motorists and tourists, enthusiasts can drive. Now, maybe this is worthwhile. Maybe it's not on that side of things. So I wanted to ask more about their financial position. And so I asked them, tell me what kind of economic impact. They sent over a report that claims they've done $100 million in economic impact as a nonprofit. I don't believe them. Bashir will come out here and do a ribbon cutting ceremony on a company bringing in 30 jobs to a place like Eastern Kentucky. You want me to believe there's a nonprofit bringing in $100 million of revenue into the area and all of us don't know about it? They'd be throwing parades for the guy. But the other problem with the claim that this is a good investment deals with how we actually make money off tourism. So this is all about putting this money all into this area in order to create a vibrant economy in Eastern Kentucky. The problem with that claim is that the way the Kentucky Constitution is wrote, the way the tax codes are wrote, you cannot make money off tourism as a county in Kentucky. It actually costs you money, and I can't believe nobody's done the numbers on this, okay? So let me explain. The way counties can generate revenue is by either property tax, occupational tax, which is basically an income tax. They can make money off of profits off of business. And then they also have some other taxation, but that's their main like 3 or 4 options. They can do an occupational tax, a profit off business tax, a property tax, etc. What they don't have the ability to do is what's called a local option sales tax. They have no ability to collect local sales tax. So let's think about this for a second, okay? So you have a company, a manufacturing company come in and provide 100 jobs to an area. So you collect money off the profit off that business, which is probably, if it's creating 100 jobs, probably in the millions. You collect money off that payroll. So off 100 jobs, let's say average one is paying, I don't know, like $20 an hour, let's say. Long story short, the county ends up generating directly off that business right around about $175,000, $200,000 a year of tax revenue. And what do they get in return for that? What do they have to provide? Well, they just have to provide services to the 100 people that maybe they move to the area, and then you collect, of course, property tax because that causes property values to go up. But even if they don't, you just have to provide services for basically 100 people while they're there. On tourism, all the tourism jobs that get created are low-paying, low-skill jobs, and they don't need a large amount of people. For example, tourism brings in shops. One person can work a store, and a lot of times it might be the owner that's not even paying themselves. So you're not getting an occupational tax off that. Or it's a restaurant where you are predominantly you have bartenders and servers. And then the cooks and hosts, if they have them, are, obviously those are people who are generally lower hourly paid. But the waiters and waitresses, they don't even like claim their income. So they don't have to pay taxes on it. So to generate, let's say, 100 tourism jobs, you're going to need 10, 15,000 tourist visitors. So to generate even that same, let's say they're even generating the same 200,000, they're not, but let's say they're generating 200,000 off those 100 tourism jobs. What do they have to provide in response to that? Well, they have to provide services to now 10, 15,000 people a year that aren't even a part of their community. They're just visiting. It's a lose-lose situation for these counties. And you also have to have these things. So you bring visitors to an area. Well, if there's nowhere for them to spend their money, and I think of Red River Gorge, you go up to Red River Gorge, has tons. It's probably one of our biggest tourism attractions of Eastern Kentucky. You go off their main exit for Red River Gorge. What do you see? You got 4 or 5 restaurants and 2 gas stations. That's like it. That's it. And don't get me wrong, very busy during the peak season. But the point is when it's not peak, there's not enough there to like provide a business. So they don't really have businesses there. So on top of dumping millions of dollars into this pipe dream of a rally driving course, we're dumping millions of dollars into this nonprofit to supposedly build tourism that we can't even gain revenue off of. It's a complete waste. Instead, that money should be spent on something else. We'll discuss about what that something else is, but I got another nonprofit I need to talk about. One that Beshear is the chair of, receiving literally millions of dollars a year, including $40 million from the federal government recently. And he's the chair of this nonprofit. So we'll be discussing that when we get back. If you want to join into the conversation, 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. I'm Andrew Cooperrider. We'll be back here in just a few short.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back on Kentucky's Voice, discussing today about a couple different topics. Right now we're talking about nonprofits that are supposed to be servicing Eastern Kentucky. That seems like they're just servicing themselves a little bit. Hard to see the return on some of these. Last segment, we were talking about this nonprofit that's receiving over $1 million a year taxpayer funds, Backroads of Appalachia, most of it going to a consulting company. Somebody had texted in saying, I bet the consulting company head is a buddy of the government. I would actually bet the consulting company's owned by the director of the nonprofit. I'm not saying that's true. I don't know. They wouldn't tell me who the consulting company is. I wouldn't be surprised if he has an ownership interest in it. I see it time and time again. Now, they did also ask about the governor's nonprofit. This is, I'm going to follow up on this here by telling everybody this the story here. So, Beshear is the chair of a nonprofit that has received tens of millions of dollars in taxpayer funds. So, Beshear and Hal Rogers are the co-chairs and two of the only three officers over the nonprofit called Shaping Our Appalachian Region, SOAR. To date, SOAR has received over $8.5 million in Kentucky taxpayer funds, was just awarded an additional $1.5 million in House Bill 900, which was also signed by Beshear about a week ago. Also in 2024, the Biden administration announced SOAR would receive an additional $40 million in funding. Now, what does SOAR do? Well, SOAR is one of the regional innovation hubs. You see these in places like, there's different ones all over the region. In Louisville, the innovation hub is called Amplify, I believe. In Lexington, it's Awesome Inc. And so these are regional innovation hubs that receive government funding essentially to help with, it's supposed to foster tech startup and business growth. It's like little incubators supposed to connect them with donors and as such. And as a part of that, these all are nonprofits. Now, these nonprofits, the other nonprofits like Awesome Inc., Amplify, Paducah, I think is Sprocket, Kentucky is Blue North, I think. Anyways, they do not have Beshear on the board. In fact, when I searched for Beshear as an officer of companies, the only company in Kentucky, the only organization filed with the Secretary of State that Beshear is a part of, that is an officer of, is SOAR, Shaping Our Appalachian Region. Now, he's not just the chair, he's also one of the only three officers. So it's not just he's put on the board and it's just kind of whatever. He's an officer and chair of the board. I have all kinds of issues with this. The same person that's signing off on the funding for SOAR, the same person signing the bills for SOAR, is the chair of the nonprofit. This is a fantastic way to get around all kinds of procurement laws and other audit laws that go into the transparency of how money's being spent. If you can shuffle off taxpayer dollars to a private organization that you're the chair of as governor, well, that's a great way to do some favors for some people, don't you think? Now, to be clear, I don't believe Beshear receives a salary or anything from this nonprofit, but he doesn't have to. Because normal procurement, right, if you're normally doing procurement or work in an area or something along those lines, you'll end up having to get multiple bills, public bids as such, and it's harder to basically do favors for your buddy. But when it's a private nonprofit that isn't subject to those requirements, it's real easy to give your buddy a contract. It doesn't even have to be explicit as you do this for me, I give you this. It's just as natural as, oh, I know a guy that donates to my campaign that does that. We'll just give him the taxpayer funds, the tens of millions of dollars. Now, Hal Rogers is also a co-chair. I take issue with that as well, but there's a little bit of a difference. Now, how does SOAR get funded? How does this get decided? It does have earmarks and line items that come out of budgets that get approved. But also, it gets funding out of the economic development budget. It gets funding out of different grant programs that the government is offering. And who awards those? Who decides that? Well, the Beshear administration, ultimately Beshear. So the legislature does have some say in the funding over SOAR, the Kentucky legislature. But ultimately, a lot of it is left up to Beshear and Beshear alone to decide. Now, please tell me how this is proper. Please tell me how it's okay to have the governor of a state, the person signing off on the millions being received by this nonprofit, to be the chair of the nonprofit. If the governor's making any decisions on how taxpayer funds are being spent, it should be transparent. It should have to follow the law. It should have to go through normal processes. And this is an end around all of that. And it's, once again, it's the only organization in the state, private organization in the state, that according to the Secretary of State's office, Beshear is even a part of. It's not like there's tons of nonprofits out there that just give the governor a chairmanship. Now, to be fair, historically, SOAR has always structured its board this way. The governor and then Hal Rogers there on the board. But it is still improper. And it becomes even more suspicious when you actually look at the historical funding. So in 2019, this is before Beshear took over as governor, SOAR brought in $1.2 million, mostly in government funding. In 2024, SOAR brought in, according to their 990s, $3.5 million, mostly in government spending, with tens of millions of more promised in the coming years. Now, am I sitting here saying SOAR's done nothing good? The same way that when I was talking about Backroads of Appalachia, am I saying they've done nothing good? Of course not. All nonprofits will do something good that they can point to, justify their existence. If they don't do anything good, well then, how do you defend yourself against people like me calling out your improper funding and your improper board and the fact you're receiving millions of dollars of taxpayer funds? But that doesn't get around the fact that there's real waste going on. And I have a real problem, too. A lot of these nonprofits that sit here and have these organizations and everything else, when they're doing things that aren't, either it's the role of the government or it's not. If you have a private nonprofit doing something, that's a good indication that either one, it's not the role of government, or government can't do it efficiently. So why would we have the government then funding it? If it's not the government's role, maybe the government taxpayer shouldn't be, maybe the taxpayers shouldn't be the ones funding it in the first place. Call me crazy. Well, if you want to chime in to this, you can text us over 502-571-0970. 502-571-0970. Maybe you're as fired up about it as I am, but extremely improper for Beshear to be the chair of a nonprofit getting $40 million from the federal government, getting $8 million from the state government, with millions more. I mean, just awarded $1.5 million. $1.5 million to bring in remote workers. When we get back, we'll talk about that governor's position, because obviously that's coming up for election. Will be an open seat, and we already have some Democrats jumping in that race. That'll be a good discussion. You'll want to stay with us here. I'm Andrew Cooperrider, your host for the day here on Kentucky's Voice. We'll be back in a very short 2 minutes.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back on Kentucky's Voice, your host for the day, Andrew Cooper-Ryder. We were discussing some nonprofits, getting a little funky with the money, if you know what I mean. A couple comments here people have made. Government employees or elected officials should not be on any nonprofit positions or boards. It's not proper. I agree. They shouldn't be involved, especially if it's receiving government funding. Big conflict of interest there, obviously. Nonprofit organizations should not receive any government funds. I'm with you too. Like I said, if it's the government is a nonprofit. I know it doesn't seem like it. I mean, the politicians make their change, you know. I mean, it's benefiting somebody. Somebody's profiting, but ain't me. But the government is a nonprofit. If there's nonprofit work to be done that is the proper role of government to do, there's no reason for the government to need a private nonprofit to do it. If, however, there is nonprofit work that is not the role of the government to do, then the government shouldn't be funding it. Simple ideas. Simple ideas, and something where we actually need somebody in place as governor that's going to recognize this and say, look, you know, we got to get control on this going on. Another person asked, is Beshear doing a bait and switch with SOAR, Shaping Our Appalachia? I don't even know if it has to be necessarily a full-fledged bait and switch as much as it is, okay, so we have a nonprofit that's getting millions of dollars taxpayer funds. I'm over it. I kind of laid this out last segment, okay, this nonprofit and its legitimate work needs a website built. Well, you know, I've got this donor over here that builds websites. I'll just give him an inflated, you know, $200,000-$300,000 contract to do the nonprofit work on the website. And then in return, they know that, hey, I'm here. I've driven money into your business. Maybe you cut me a few more campaign checks. You know what I mean? But if you're looking for somebody that will not improperly use taxpayer funds, I tell you who's not it, and that's Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman. She made it very clear in her announcement. Now, she's announced she's running for governor. It'll be Jacqueline Coleman and Rocky Atkins. Mark my words. That is who will be this primary fight will be between. And oh joy, as Republicans, all we can hope is that it gets very ugly and weighs them down. But I want to play for you her announcement video to make it very clear early on. She will have no problem wasting taxpayer funds. She'll have no problem with improper use of taxpayer funds. She'll have no problem with using government to further herself and government resources in very improper ways. And she made it very clear in her first video. Let's go ahead. If you're listening on the radio, you'll just be able to hear it. But if you're watching, you should be able to see it. The audio might be a little choppy here, but I think it's important, one, to hear what she has to say, but two, so I can explain what she's done in this video that we can draw the conclusion that she is just as bad as Beshear. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
Schools aren't just desks and whiteboards. They're the heart of our communities and the economic engine of our Commonwealth. Parents in the drop-off line might be on their way to clock into a shift. The kid learning algebra, she might be tomorrow's small business owner or a governor. It all starts here, in classrooms like this one all across Kentucky. I'm Jacqueline Coleman, and I've had a few jobs in my life. A not so great farmhand on my family farm in Bergen, but I did learn how to drive a mower before I could drive a car. I've been a high school civics teacher, an assistant principal, and a basketball coach, which means I know when it's time to shoot my shot. I'm an adoptive mom and a bonus mom to 3 young adults, and the mom of a kindergartner who has them all in the palm of her hand. In these past 6 years, I've had the honor of being your Lieutenant Governor. Kentucky's economy is leading the nation. I'm proud that the Beshear Coleman administration has created nearly 70,000 jobs and generated over $45 billion of investment in the Commonwealth. One of the things I've learned from Andy, take good care of people and the jobs will follow. It's not just the importance of the work, it's also the importance of the people doing the work. And any coach worth their salt will tell you there's always more work to do. Whether you're a basketball coach or a governor, the name of the game is to make every tomorrow better than today. I'm running for governor to make that better tomorrow a reality for all Kentuckians, especially our kids and grandkids. Come join the team and let's build on the progress we've made together.
So a few things. First off, from just a sheer knowledgeable of campaigns, that logo, you guys can see it. It was like a Technicolor logo. So for those of you who are unaware, a one collar or two collar campaign sign is you typically want your campaign logo to be two collars at the most, because it keeps your printing costs down when you have to print signs, so they don't have to be full collar signs, but you can just do two collar signs. That has 20 collars in it. That will be one expensive yard sign. That's all I'm going to say. But putting that to the side, what I wanted, for those of you who are unable to see that, almost that entire video was shot inside a school. Now, there was some B-roll of schools and people at places, but when she was talking, she was inside a school. But not just any school. She was inside Woodford County High School. The same high school that her husband is vice principal of. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think if I wanted to film a campaign video, I could get access to my local high school? Do you think there's at one point where she's filming and she's outside the door and there's a bunch of kids streaming inside the door and she's standing there greeting them like she's, still a teacher, right? She's greeting them at the door. And I believe it was shot the same day she was shooting everything else, because I believe she's in the same outfit. And there's these kids. I've questioned, are those extras? Did you bring those kids in? Or did you really film outside of the school on a school day? And now you've got other people's kids in this video. Now you don't see their faces, but you got other people's kids in this video. And for all you know, those parents of those kids hate Jacqueline Coleman. They hate the Beshear administration. And now they were just forced into a campaign ad for her. But she's standing there in the classroom. She's walking through the halls. She's in the gymnasium playing basketball. I wonder how many takes it took for her to shoot that shot and make it in. I'm curious. I want to know. But she's in front of the trophy case talking to parents or whatever, supposedly talking to voters. Obviously, I don't think any of them were white. All very different. So anyways, point is if we're looking for somebody that's going to not use taxpayer funds for their own personal advantage, Jacqueline Coleman ain't it. In fact, she'll use the fact that her husband's vice principal of a school in order to go ahead and have a set location for her ads. And when I went looking on Woodford County's website for any kind of policy of how do I get access? Maybe I want to film a video. Maybe I want to film a video making fun of Jacqueline Coleman's video. That's something I would do, right? Well, how do I get access? How do I file for access to the Jacqueline Coleman set? It's taxpayer funded. She doesn't live there. The only connection she has is that her husband works there. Well, if I want access, geez, I don't even know how to go about it. I guess I got to email somebody, ask. Probably background checks have to go on, because what you don't want is somebody saying, hey, I want to film in your school, and you just let anybody willy-nilly in. And so then they can, do things like, I don't know, plant explosives or something to go off during the school day. So, of course, you're going to want to background check everybody coming in normally. Did they do that? Or was it just trust the vice president? Did the vice principal Coleman just literally, did he just swipe her in to the school and they could just film? Did they ask? Was it just casual? Hey, is it okay if we do this? Sure, whatever. Or was there actual forms and actual process to it? Probably not. But what I want to say, though, about the content is that it's awful. Content's awful. Doesn't really talk much about what she'd do outside of continuing Beshear. Obviously, she's going to attach herself to this. For the first time ever, I've heard the Beshear-Coleman administration. And I've never heard that before because, of course, the lieutenant governor isn't like a large part of like any of that. When we look at things like Beshear's so-called economic travels and things he's doing for, to bring in business to Kentucky, we see his wife going with him. We see economic development cabinet head. We see Office of Budget Director sometimes going with. We see those people, aides going with him. You know who we never see going with him? Jacqueline Coleman. Have you ever seen it? I haven't. In fact, she's claiming credit for these economic development, which, by the way, already these economic development claims are dubious. I mean, we know, obviously, I'd love to know how many of those jobs they're counting on for, like, it being, I don't know, Ford that kind of sort of shuttered. But if you go to your new Kentucky, was it newkentuckyhome.ky.gov, which is their economic development website, I see videos and pictures of, Beshear doing things, Beshear talking to people, him walking around places. You know what I don't see is Jacqueline Coleman doing jack. Actually, if you want to get Shirley down into it, who has more responsibility, if you look at the governor's administration, say, that is, like, I think they did good if you're somebody who thinks that. Rocky Atkins, who she'll be running against, will have way more to do with that than she will. However, what's interesting is Rocky Atkins will most likely be destroyed in the not destroyed, but it will be an ugly primary because Rocky Atkins has something that Coleman doesn't, which is a voting record because he was in the state house, and some of that includes some pro-life votes that will burn up the Democrats. So it does become a question for the Republicans. Who do you want? Do you want Jacqueline Coleman or do you want Rocky Atkins? We'll discuss that when we get back here on Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. We'll be back in a short 2 minutes.
to Kentucky's Voice Radio online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back on Kentucky's Voice. Last segment, we were discussing about this Jacqueline Coleman launch video taking place inside the school that her husband is vice principal over in Woodford County, leading to some questions about improper use of taxpayer funds. Some people sent in some messages about this. If you want to jump into the conversation, it's 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. Here's some comments came in. She did the ad on government time. I don't know when she filmed it. I would love to know, and maybe somebody will find out when she did the ad on if she did it on government time or just like on the weekend or something else like that. But regardless, these politicians are always using, whether it's because, this is something that goes on across all our constitutional offices in general, right? So they're like normal week for a constitutional officer involves a couple evening events throughout the week, and on weekends they're always going to some event, Lincoln Day dinner or something like that, some sort of dinner. And so they're always at some sort of dinner or political event, and because of that, they like never work in the office. It's like a well-known thing that, your auditor, your treasurer, a lot of your people just don't show up to work ever because they're busy doing the politicking thing. And we see that with our congressmen. We see that with our senators. We see that with all of them, where their full-time job is to be a politician, not to be a representative or not to be a constitutional officer or as such. Just being honest. But someone said, what was her contribution to the school for its use for her campaign ad? Probably nothing. She probably gave nothing to the school outside of her husband working there. Somebody had said, Jacqueline who? Following up with that, somebody else said she took the credit for stuff her and Andy had no part in, accomplished by others. That's right. So on top of the fact that she's trying to take the accomplishments, quote unquote accomplishments, let's just air quotes for all this, accomplishments of Beshear to make them her own. But on top of that, Beshear's accomplishments aren't even Beshear's accomplishments. Beshear will claim accomplishments like, we have the biggest surplus ever in Kentucky history. Like, you vetoed the budget. You vetoed the revenue bill. You vetoed them. Why are you taking credit for a budget and a revenue bill you had no part of? If you're actually excited that the government has a surplus, which arguably you shouldn't be, but anyways, if you're actually excited about that, it's not even Beshear who does it. It's the legislature. He takes credit for tax cuts that he vetoed the initial ones, signed some of them. But even when he signed the ones he signed, he cut a video like, I don't want to sign this, but I guess I kind of have to. People will be mad if I don't sign off on a tax cut. Absolutely ridiculous. But look, here's the question for Republicans. What do you want? Do you want Jacqueline Coleman or Rocky Atkins in the final? Now, I initially came into this thinking you want Jacqueline Coleman because she's the one with less of, a little more, I guess, I wouldn't call it vapid per se, but she's, some people called her Kentucky's Kamala. I haven't heard her talk much. Once again, Jacqueline who? But, my initial thought is that, well, Rocky Atkins is the kind of blue dog Democrat type that, okay, keep in mind that Kentucky, up until recently, was a predominantly Democrat state. And you have to keep in mind that a lot of these people who are current Republicans, the majority of Kentuckians at some point were Democrats. The majority of Republicans, not Republicans, but Kentuckians were Democrats at some point. And the majority of our electoral voting group here in Kentucky voted for a Democrat or voted for several Democrats at some point in their voting history, and probably not that long ago. That's just the facts. So with that in mind, it is not impossible for some Democrat to exist that could come into Kentucky and convince those who used to be Democrats that he's one of the good ones. And Rocky Atkins has been around a long time. He's a mainstay in Eastern Kentucky, common Democrat stronghold that's lost a lot to Republicans recently, but something that he could pick up. He has a voting history that is the kind of thing that it's rough for a general too. There's some points in it that are problems that you can hit him on. But at the same time, he has a pro-life voting record, or has something he can point to as a pro-life voting record, that he will get attacked on in the primary. He'll get attacked for that. But does he represent more of a problem in the general than Jacqueline Coleman? Now, I was thinking up until a year or two ago, 2 days ago, when she first declared that, honestly, if I was them, I think I'd rather have Jacqueline Coleman. Because Rocky Atkins is kind of the, whatever. But somebody said something to me today where they said, well, Jacqueline Coleman has the ability to draw out the base. She's got the teacher's base that people point to as a large part of what got Beshear elected. In fact, a person texted in, she's a pawn of the teachers union. I would concur with that statement. By the way, if you want to get in your text, 502-571-0970. We got about 6 minutes left, so get your text in if you want. But also, she's the kind of person that could rally the support in Lexington and Louisville that Rocky Atkins wouldn't be able to. Because in these off-year elections, it turns into a lot more of a turnout game when you get to the general. And as evidence of this here, if we look at the voting block, the amount of people who voted in the 2023 election, we see that it was 1.3 million people. Okay, 1.3 million people. Now, if you look at the 2024 election, with Trump in Kentucky, what did he win with? Let's see here. He won with, there's a total of 2 million votes there. So 2 million in the presidential election year compared to 1.3 million in a governor election year. That's about a difference of 700,000 voters. 700,000 voters. And when you look at who voted for Kamala in Kentucky, you see that number at 704,000. 704,000. Guys, that is enough Kamala voters in Kentucky that if they all turned out during a Democrat election for governor based upon historical turnout ratings, it would be enough to win. If Republican turnout is low and Democrats are able to get their people out, they win. As part of kind of what happened to Daniel Cameron and Andy Beshear. Is that and look, the Democrats are more fired up in Kentucky to turn out and vote in those elections, especially because they're coming off a Democrat governor. It seems like a winnable race. They won't win the Senate. We know that. They're not going to win the Senate. Like literally a rock with an R next to their name because there's too much turnout. There's too much turnout in normal election years. But the off-year governor election years means that it becomes a turnout game. And who's going to turn out more people? Rocky Atkins or Jacqueline Coleman? And that's what this person is bringing up to me is that, look, Jacqueline Coleman can run up the numbers in places like Lexington and Louisville while at the same time hold her own because she's kind of got that, Kentucky accent, mountains accent a little bit. She's actually, I believe, from Harrodsburg. And that's the other thing. She's not from one of Lexington or Louisville. She's from Harrodsburg, which can help bring in some of the rural vote you need to pad the edges. Now, will Rocky Atkins be able to turn out the people in Lexington and Louisville like that? I don't know. But he could potentially win over some of the Republicans. Someone texted in saying, rather face Rocky. Yeah, I mean, Rocky also, because the other problem with Jacqueline Coleman, when you're looking at it from a sheer campaign side, is she doesn't have like a voting record. She's kind of a blank slate. She can basically be Beshear. I mean, she's somebody that her only thing she has going for her, positive or negative, is Beshear. And regardless of how you cut it, and I think they're wrong, and I think people are stupid, but Beshear is the most popular Democrat governor in the country, according to polling. And obviously, he's been a two-term Democrat governor during a time where Kentucky, where other Democrats have lost. Whether it's fake and it's folksy and people are dumb and voters are dumb or whatever you want to call it, or people have called it stealing election, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. The point is Beshear has won and demonstrated that he can win. So if somebody can come in and ride those coattails while not having a lot of negative to say about them and nothing you can drag them down with and tie them down with, it could be harder to beat them than somebody like Rocky Adkins, who does have a voting record that has a good thing to attack him with. Because here's the thing that Republicans in general in the state, and this is a McConnell machine thing, and maybe with McConnell gone, we'll get some fresh voices inside these campaign rooms to fix it. But what the McConnell machine fails at is getting people to vote for somebody. They can get somebody to vote against somebody. That's what they rely on. I want you to vote against somebody, not for. That's how McConnell's always won. It's not vote for McConnell. It's vote against Amy McGrath. Vote against this person. Vote against that person. The problem is if there's not enough there to make you say, I want to vote against that person, like you may run into with Jacqueline Coleman, there may not be enough juice. And you got to rely on getting people to vote for you. And that's something Republicans in Kentucky, statewide, the apparatus, the super smart controlling establishment Republicans in Kentucky cannot do. They have failed to do it. Get people to vote for something and not just against something. Someone said it's hard to beat dead, moved away voter roll people. It is. I get you. I hear you. Election integrity is a problem. Well, guys, that's what we got time for today. Make sure you tune back in tomorrow. Somebody else is hosting. Will they be amazing? I don't know. But it's worth listening to. We'll see you guys next week, though, here for my turn to host Kentucky's Voice.